The King of the Battlefield Chapter 91. Chapter 91, Immortal King's Armor, 2. TL, Yoni. Editor, Lee Suris. Demon Dragon Lethal Cannon was a cannon made to kill demon dragons. However, it was sealed as an ancient relic and Bartas had recently lifted the seal. Words couldn't explain its destructive power, but the problem was that it took too long to blast. If the opponent was Dark Dragon Barca, it was enough time for him to notice the unexpected change and for it to avoid the attack. That was why they left it to rust, but it was still an item that required great secrecy. He became confused as to how Muyong knew of this item. It was when he was about to glance suspiciously at Muyong. My owner is the ruler of all the Dakibas. He sometimes looks through the truth which no one knows of. Even coming here was to stop the future that is heading towards destruction. Kalmu added an adequate amount of flavor to his words. In reality, from Kalmu's perspective view, Muyong didn't know anything and openly acted as if he could see the future. Muyong was a wise owner. Kalmu believed that Muyong could definitely find a way for everyone to benefit. That was why he could lie without any hesitation to Bartas. As currently, his owner was Muyong. You say? You are talking about the position that is chosen through the Dakibi's ceremony. Only then did Bartas look at Muyong differently. It was clear that he knew well of However, if he was he was the owner of a few 10,000 Dakibas. He was unsure for what reason Muyong came alone, but instead of filling the numbers with weak Dakibas, it's better to have one who is good. His skills were already proven. The desperate fight against the twin-head ogre. He saw scenes like when Muyong cured his own horrendous wound. Bartas remembered the vivid scenes. However, it was unknown if he could buy time against a dragon. Bartas looked at Muyong. A look without an inch of hesitation. He couldn't really know what Muyong's thoughts were, but at the end, there was an abyss. He has already witnessed his bottom. And those people had their own creed. Indeed. He could say that he was the ruler of Dakibas. On top of that, since Kalmu followed Muyong, he had more trust in him. The Golden Hammer tribe was known to be sincere and credible. They didn't really follow others, but for those who were worthy, the Golden Hammer tribe were the type of dwarves who gave out all they had. I will make you an armor. However, it will take time. Although Bartas managed the dwarves harshly, he was undoubtedly the blacksmith known as God Hand. There was no way he would do a rough job in creating an equipment. However, Bartas was asking what Muyong would do if something was to happen by chance during that time. Muyong shrugged his shoulders. I will train them. Train. Dwarves were originally born with warrior's blood. When you look at past literature, there are stories that explain how dwarves easily captured dragons. Although dwarves were famous for being blacksmiths, they undoubtedly had the characteristics of warriors who wore the equipment they made. It was also the content written in numerous ancient literature. Only, there were just so many who were after the dwarves that they had to live a long life of fleeing that they lost their tendency. The fear and horror of being a fugitive had suppressed their instincts. And Muyong knew well of a way to calm those emotions. Bartas's eyes slightly shook. It wasn't like he didn't know of these ancient stories as well. However, he considered them as nonsense. The superiority among the species was too clear. There was truly a limit to their origin. Bartas was the one who was just satisfied to use his handcraft in order to toy with the dragon. If the dwarves could hunt the dragon, there was no reason for them not to. They were only half given up because they concluded that they couldn't hunt dragons. How long are you planning to run away? The reason why the dragons are disregarding the dwarves and continuously attacking is because you guys don't fight back. A chance to fight isn't always given. Muyong's cold but sharp words pierced through his heart. An enemy who doesn't fight back. Is there an easier target than this? Just running away wasn't everything. In reality, although dragons were strong and arrogant monsters, they were quite careful about choosing their prey. If the dwarves were actively counterattacking and were successful in landing a hit, the dragons wouldn't easily meddle with them. So fight. Life is a battle and a continuous fight. However, it wasn't like a chance was always given. If they were to give up even this chance, they would forever live a life as fugitives. Myung was telling them so. Bartez's body was shaking fiercely. Plot against a dragon? He had thought of it countless times but never put it to action. If someone else said this, he would have regarded as rubbish and ignored the person, but the words of the Dakibi in front of him were strangely persuasive. He had more sincerity than anyone else, and for some reason, the words he spoke of made him imagine them as though they were going to happen in real life. It was an effect made by the combination of Myung's fighting aura, purity, and star of the Absolute. Normally, Bartez would think about it more carefully before making a decision, but his rationality had become very blunt after fighting with monsters for 15 days. I will make you the world's sturdiest armor that can sufficiently block a dragon's attack. I will make dwarves into the world's bravest warriors. A deal was accepted. Myung held out his hand, and when their hands met, the counterattack had started. Myung thought of a systematic training method for the dwarves. As their species were different, they needed a different training method as well. Dwarves were an unfortunate species with short arms and short legs. However, their stamina was good, and most of all they had the backbone. Even from the start, they were able to follow a fairly intense training. The best way to remove fear is to push them so that they don't have any other thoughts. Pushing them to their limits, and in secret, removing the fear they had of dragons. So that when they are faced with a dragon, they wouldn't be as nervous. If Myung had to buy time with just his strength, no matter how good the armor was, it would have been impossible. However, if the 30,000 dwarves actively took part in the battle, he could definitely bear it. It would be quite worth seeing when I add the dragon's head to my skull accessory collection. Myung slightly lowered his head and looked at his skull accessory. The thing that wrapped around Myung's neck like a necklace had a miniature version of the twin-head ogre's head. It was the equipment he earned from the relic storage of the Murloc King, and when a head was added his stats also rose, and depending on how you use it, it was a necklace that could display an effect much better than what it was ranked. As he looked more closely, a description about it appeared. Name, Skull Accessory. Rank, A. Classification, A. Keepable type. Durability, 16,842. Effect, it was an accessory used by the lunatic lich. As of now, there is only one skull, but you can increase the number of skulls to at most 5. To increase the number, you can extract the head of your opponent and use this necklace to automatically minimize it into a skull that will be added to the necklace. Asterisk, your stats increase by the number of heads you extort. Asterisk, currently, 2 types of heads are equipped. Asterisk, head of Jigshiho, strength, agility +4. Asterisk, head of twin-head ogre, strength +15. An effect that increased the strength by 15 was added. This couldn't be the end. At most 5. He was still able to add 3 types of heads. He couldn't even imagine what kind of effect he would receive if he was to add the dragon's head. Are you really planning to put those on them? From the side, Kalmo worriedly asked as he held a heavy iron ball. Dwarves had exceptional stamina. It would take time to push them. That was why he was going to experiment their limits using heavy iron balls. In the beginning, they might oppose him, but in time, they would feel a sense of kinship. When will they be finished? Since it isn't really a difficult job and a lot of dwarves are working on it, it should be finished in half a day, but isn't that something you put on slaves? Dwarves are currently no different than slaves. If they don't become strong enough to break free on their own, they will forever live as slaves. Kalmo quietly nodded his head. This iron ball was literally a type of trial. It was his goal to make them fight on their own instead of as slaves. Myung closed his eyes and sunk into meditation. Although the surface injuries from the twin-head ogre had healed, his inner parts were wrecked. To stabilize this, he needed to look into his inner parts. It was quite a sight to see 30,000 dwarves wearing heavy iron balls. And it was unexpected when the amount of backlash was less than what he had expected. Was it because of the Lord of the Alliance, Bartas, supported Muyong? While Bartas was making the armor, Kalmu and Muyong suddenly became the second in command. This was also possible because Bartas was in good control over the alliance. It turned out well. If he could start right away, there was nothing better than this. Clank! The iron ball constantly produced a sound whenever dwarves moved. It was an obvious thing considering how something weighing over 50 kilograms was attached to both legs. While everyone was curious as to what kind of training he was going to teach, Muyong spoke briefly. Run. After running around the castle for half of the day, all the dwarves laid flat onto the ground. However, just running wouldn't be all of it. Fight against each other. I will form ranks in numbers of tens, hundreds, and thousands. By placing ranks and dividing the numbers into small, medium, and large, he was planning to use it effectively. Since the dwarves didn't have this kind of system, they weren't able to react quickly in case of an emergency. Didn't they waste a lot of time when the gate was opened by being confused? He couldn't see it happen again. Dwarves stole glances at one another. Azura's path. But, it wasn't like there was no way. Muyong opened his Azura's path. Murloc King Murtyudun and numerous mad specters popped out. Oh ho, they are tasty-looking dwarves. Make them fight. Are you not making them into specters? No. That's disappointing. As Murtyudun smacked his lips and starting to move, the specters also started to spread. Smack! The mad specters of Azura Path started to meddle with dwarves' mind, and as one started to move, in an instant, 30,000 dwarves started to fight with each other. Looking at how they were so helpless against the mind-controlling type, Muyong couldn't help but laugh, but it meant that they were at their limits mentally. Muyong nodded his head and waited for the fight to end. Besides simply being strong internally, they were also given hardship. It was the invasion of monsters. Muyong needed to continuously lure monsters since he might have been found suspicious if monsters stopped invading after his arrival. And that part was played by Wuhi and the undead. Although they were a bit late, they brought a few tens of Jeokshio. Jeokshio were monsters with red fur and looked similar to huge lions. They were more famous by their nickname, Ruthless Hunter. Jeokshio can ravage dwarves more cruelly than a dragon. If you don't fight, you will suffer. With his arms crossed, Muyong looked on. By slowly degrading the dragon, he was planning to lower their fear of the dragon from their impression. From continuously pushing the dwarves without rest, their reason was half gone. As the specters consistently stimulated the dwarves that they were in tip-top shape. If they don't fight, they will become prey. Everything was a continuous battle. Dwarves were slowly understanding this. Grrrrrrr. Jeokshio, that felt something strange, moved back a step. However, in an instant, the dwarves surrounded the Jeokshio. Truly, the dwarves have the disposition to become warriors. At last, their hidden potential started to bloom. There was an effect from cornering them. Mad. They needed to become mad. They couldn't survive unless they were mad. After a month, the dwarves were completely altered. Bartas, who showed up after a month of seclusion, couldn't help but widen his eyes. Hi-ya! Die! Kaya ha ha ha! As if they were holding real weapons, they were really fighting as their life depended on it. He couldn't find the simpleness they had before, and instead, they were full of spite. It seems like the armor is finished. As Muyong slowly approached Bartas and spoke, Bartas stammered. What happened? Didn't I say that I will make them into warriors? Warriors? Gulp. Bartas gulped his saliva. They were true warriors. However, no matter how he looked at them, they didn't seem like normal warriors. This was still a great improvement. By looking at how the corpses of monsters were piled up in the middle, it seemed like he had really trained the dwarves properly. Take this. It's the armor made from the heart of the phoenix. Black freckles were all around Bartez's eyes. It was because he didn't sleep for a month and devoted himself to creating this. With his exhausted expression, he passed the armor he brought heavily. Soon, Muyoung's eyes became conspicuous. At last, as he lifted the armor structured with dragon bones, a hot fire engulfed Muyoung. As if it was alive, the heart of the armor was pumping. Muyoung's heart also started to pump as he looked at the armor. Chapter 92, Immortal King's Armor, End. TL, Yoni. Editor, Lee Suras. It's hot. Small flames were splattering on the armor. A phoenix was a monster that reached the limits of fire. Since all its strength came from its heart, it was an obvious thing. Bartez spoke as he smacked his lips. I have seen the heart of the phoenix a few times, but I haven't seen one like that. It didn't simply have fire but had all kinds of characteristics. Where did you even find this? Headley's cow was able to transform however it wanted. Transforming into any living thing, Headley's cow became it. Its greatest form was the phoenix, but it didn't have any limitation to attributes. As Muyoung didn't reply, Bartez continued to talk as if he knew Muyoung wouldn't. Either way, that armor is incomplete. It's incomplete. This time, Muyoung's voice became quieter. The armor he received was spotless and had a beautiful exterior. At least to Muyoung's eyes, it didn't have a problem, internally or externally. However, Bartez was God hand. His opinion was probably right. If it was incomplete, he needed to know why. It means it doesn't have a specific characteristic. Right now, the energy of fire is strong and is suppressing the other characteristics, but that wouldn't last long. Then what happens? I'm not sure. It could get destroyed, lead the user to a path of self-destruction, or even drag them to subterranean. The subterranean was the world where shadow monsters lived. It was also called the hidden world, and there was no appearance of monsters that weren't strong. Like the time when a shadow criminal appeared in the trial of the destructive powers would toy with everyone. Muyoung slightly anticipated that the 11 Masters of Darkness might be the shadows that are active in the hidden world. Also, there was no standard as to when the subterranean opened and closed. Just that in a time, in a place, a rift was created, and when it linked to the subterranean, the shadows from that place flooded out. There were a considerable number of normal people who were dragged to the subterranean. Bartez was talking about that subterranean. They say that the subterranean was born from chaos. Bartez meant that sort of chaos might occur due to the armor. Either way, it wasn't an ending Muyoung wanted. Is there a way to fix the characteristics? The blood of the user. Basically, by imprinting your blood. Since it's an item you are going to be using, you can fix the characteristics so that it matches you. It will become a finished armor only you could put on. The problem is, an armor only Muyoung could wear. It was what he wanted. A customized armor meant that it could display that much efficiency. But, he noticed Bartez's last words. Bartez let out a deep sigh as Muyoung met eye to eye with him. If your distinct characteristic is weaker than the heart of the phoenix, you will be devoured by it. Your body could burn in an instant and disappear. Even I have no idea why that kind of armor was created. Not a magical sword but a magical armor, ha! If it was used for something, it was for a type of weapon that could pierce someone. There were barely any cases where it happened for an armor. And items that were known as magical swords were swords normally restricted to the user and demonstrated power. From the beginning, armors were items that existed to protect the user. There was no reason why it would be jinxed. However, Bartez called this armor a magical armor. Do you want to devour me? Muyoung quietly looked at the armor. The small flames crawled higher and were now about to touch Muyoung's shoulders. As if it was starving, it was desiring Muyoung's source itself. Muyoung couldn't help but to quietly laugh. A mere armor is aiming for his life. An armor born to be worn was trying to kill him. Only laughter came out at this self-contradicting situation. Knock it off. Muyong instantly wiped his smile off. Slowly, he started to put on the armor. Bartas, who watched him, widened his eyes. Wait. You can't just thoughtlessly wear it. That armor is jinxed. If you wear it before taming it, it would definitely harm you. Bartas was in a hurry. He was God Hand. There was no way he would have made an armor carelessly. If anything, he could say it was a better result than normal. However, to be clear, that armor was incomplete. To bring out an armor that no one could wear, it was a shameful thing to Bartas. Only, because he didn't have time, because he made a promise, he just didn't have a choice. But, he never thought that Muyong would just wear it right away. However, Muyong didn't listen to a word Bartas said. Blaze! Instantly, Muyong's whole body started to burn after he finished putting the armor on. The flames permeated and ripped his skin. As the running blood permeated the armor, the flames burned more fiercely. Soon, Muyong had the image of a huge flame reflected in his mind. That was the heart of the phoenix. It was the will of the heart to devour Muyong. You cannot consume me. However, to Muyong, an equipment was no more than a tool to him. A tool to kill someone and protect himself. He didn't need a will from a tool he was going to use. Just follow. The blood that was permeated into the armor became a medium in which Muyong made his command. A small will suddenly became greater. All of a sudden, Muyong's will surpassed the image the heart of the phoenix gave. The heart was the armor's ego. If it was a normal person, it would have tried to oppress the ego and comfort it. However, Muyong's thoughts were different. Equipment didn't need a will. Equipment shouldn't have a will. Ego was an authority only given to the user of the equipment. How the equipment was going to be used was dependent on the user. Even more, it already showed its teeth. Muyong burned the ego the armor had. He removed it. Was it the phoenix, or the headless cow? The armor screamed its death throes. Muyong planted his strength in the place where its ego was. It was his strength of death. Since he had already come back from the dead, it was the strength only Muyong could display. It was at that moment. The color of the flames coming out from the armor changed to black. A breastplate that looked as if a black fog was spurting out. As he stood there and watched, the information about the armor popped out. Name, Immortal King's Breastplate. Rank, S+. Classification, Equipable Type. Endurance, Not Destroyable. Effect, the one that doesn't die. A breastplate that relishes the strength of the Immortal King. Asterisk only equipable by the user Muyong. Asterisk strength plus 15. Asterisk fighting aura plus 30. Asterisk stamina plus 50. Asterisk magic resistance plus 80. Asterisk depending on the fighting aura, natural healing abilities increase, currently plus 154%. When you get 3 equipment with the strength of the Immortal King, all stats plus 50. When you get 5 equipment with the strength of the Immortal King, you can use Death Reversal once. Muyong continuously checked the information of the armor. There was a big difference between an A rank and an S rank. And from S rank, each existence of A and made that much greater a difference. What Muyong anticipated was A+++ rank to at most an S rank. Even if he had the memorize of his past, an equipment that great that would be impossible to get unless he had incredible luck. But, AS and rank? It even had the stats that suited its rank. Ha! Muyong's whole body shivered lightly. Only a very few guilds had this kind of equipment. It was a reality for someone to not get even a glimpse unless they were a leader of a clan or a guild. Top 10 of the humans, or special people like Wang Chunglin, would possess an item like that. Since the weak would only get robbed of treasures. If someone was to discover Muyong right now, they would think of a way to try and kill him and take his armor. There were a countless number of people who were stronger than Muyong. He just finished his first metamorphosis. He needed to achieve at least the third metamorphosis in order to even place his foot in the circle of strong people. Fortunately, this was the demon god's territory. Also, only Muyeong could wear the armor. It meant that he currently didn't have to worry about his treasure. It's a set equipment. And on top of that, there was even a set option. When he put on 3 or 5 equipment, there was an added effect. He was most curious about the death reversal which occurred when he collected 5 equipment. Since it was only effective once, it was most likely an ability to refuse death. The power of revival was impossible even for a saint who displayed a miracle through a wish. To soundly revive a dead person. It wasn't possible. Unless it was an undead. The wish that destroyed a few Demon King forces was unable to revive a person. If Muyeong's prediction was correct, this was something anyone would be shocked by. Having a life reserved, just by that it was more fascinating than anything else. The moment this information was leaked, all the huge organizations would madly run for it. On top of that, as monstrous stats were added, Muyeong felt as if his head cleared out. He felt as though he had a slight taste of the next wall. Instantly, he opened his status viewer and found the reason why. Stats. Strength 198, 115 plus 83, Agility 162, 109 plus 53. Stamina 210, 108 plus 102, Intelligence 116, 74 plus 42. Wisdom 112, 70 plus 42, Fighting Aura 154, 66 plus 88. Magic Resistance 202, 54 plus 148, Spirit Ability 101, 53 plus 48. His stamina passed 200. It was no way near in terms of pure stats, but due to different continuous effect and equipment effect, it has doubled. Strength was also near the figure. Like this, the supporting stats will surpass the pure stats. He seemed pleased with the results. But, he wasn't planning to neglect his own development. The characteristic of the armor, completely changed. As he turned his gaze, Bartas murmured as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Besides getting rid of the phoenix's ego, Muyeong filled it with his own color. Was this possible? The monstrous strength the heart had was completely dyed. The armor that was incomplete was now complete. Just by Muyeong putting it on, it happened. It was something he never thought of. The ruler of Dakiabyss. Was that really all? What kind of magic did you use to suppress the strength of a phoenix? With a small smile, Muyeong looked at Bartas. Equipment are just tools. Bartas hesitated. He couldn't agree. He was a dwarf and the equipment that was born from his hands were all like his children. The words of it just being a tool became a dagger and pierced through his heart. However, Muyeong only smiled coldly. If he was to empathize with tools that are supposed to become and move as his hands and feet, he would be swayed at that moment. It was the reason why he erased the ego of the phoenix. Bartas, the Lord of the Alliance. Is the demon dragon lethal cannon ready? Muyeong changed the subject. Making the dwarves into warriors was near complete and he had earned the immortal king's breastplate. Now, all that was left was the dark dragon Barca. To stop his attack. He didn't think that Barca wouldn't be able to find this place. It would definitely attack before the start of the Devil's Long Night. Bartas let out a deep sigh and nodded his head. I tried to reduce the time for it to blast but I still need 60 seconds. It's enough time for the dragon to notice and escape. 30 seconds. What? Reduce it to 30 seconds. For the duration of that time, I will definitely hold Barca back. Muyeong boasted. Barca wouldn't invade the location right away. However, it was at most 2 months. Barca knew almost correctly of the dwarf's location and was moving towards them. After roaming around a few times, it would head north. He needed to find a solution by then. A second would determine the victory. Muyeong's eyes sunk deeply. 1 second. Even by a shorter time than that, the winner and loser would be determined. Even if he used all his strength, he couldn't be certain. All his muscles were a bit contracted and then relaxed as he let out his tension. The war against the dark dragon Barca had already started. Chapter 93, Dwarves' Castle War. TL, Yoni. Editor, Lee Suris. He pouted out her lips. She was luring the monsters because of Myung's favor, but it was harder than she had expected. He doesn't want to work. Blazing Avenger. He was whining while she sat on the flame mutant's shoulder. From the start, he was extremely lazy. If she was diligent, she wouldn't have taken that long in creating the endless battlefield. So, he pondered. Was there anything else new? The undead just followed orders, and it was when she was becoming bored from luring the monsters. Oh! What is that? It was when she was searching above the snow to find the next opponent. A black box came into her sight. It's a mimic. After realizing what the box was, his eyes sparkled. Mimic was a box-type monster. Normally, it was like a security magic placed on treasure boxes by high-ranked magicians. It was a monster created to automatically defend against those who touch the box. She didn't know why a mimic was in a place like this, but that wasn't what he was interested in. He instantly straightened her hand and ordered the mutants. Step on that. Whoa! Mutants slowly moved and surrounded the mimic. Mimics normally popped out of the box when someone tries to open it, but as the mutants trampled on it with their monstrous strength, it didn't have the ability to hold on. Soon, as sparkling gold coins popped out in between the half-destroyed box, he quickly flew and held them with her hands. Rings, circlets, and gold with patterns she couldn't recognize. He was clearly a female. She liked sparkling things. Jingle. Soon, treasures poured out and he plunged on top. Ah, so comfy. If I have a house, I want it decorated like this. With the treasures as her bed, he looked up to the sky with her arms crossed. If she could earn a house, he had a small dream to completely fill it with treasures like this. A house that was more wonderful and glamorous than anyone else's. Husband, let's live beautifully. She couldn't stop laughing just by imagining her golden future. If she had a huge house, full of treasures, and Myung, she didn't think she would have anything to envy in this world. It was at that moment. Swoosh! A huge black living thing flew past like an arrow in the sky. In the surroundings, there were numerous flying-type monsters. Since it happened unexpectedly, he couldn't react right away. However, his face could only harden after seeing the trajectory drawn in the cloud. Ah, Dark Dragon Barca! The Dark Dragon Barca showed itself on the north side. It has been 68 days since he entered the castle. Fight with your life on the line. I will make you realize that a dragon isn't such a big deal. Myung continued to train dwarves at an intense level. He grouped them into tens and made them attack him. Thump! Thump! Dwarves were smacking their shields and swords rhythmically. Dwarves were monsters only in the mid-level, but if they were to wear good equipment, they would exhibit a strength greater than that. Even if it was 10, Myung could not let his guard down. Without the Immortal King's breastplate, it would have been hard. Myung's true strength came from the specters and the undead. However, Myung faced the dwarves with only his own strength. There, the Immortal King's breastplate shined. First, overwhelming defensive ability. The dwarves' attacks couldn't even make a small dent. Not just the dwarves, but it was strong enough to even nullify evil spirit predator Taken's attack. But, I'm not unbeatable. The user, Myung, knew this. That he couldn't fully block the Dark Dragon Barca's attack. Indestructible was only true in terms of natural factors. It meant that it couldn't be destroyed if the endurance level was worn out. If it was to receive an impact externally, there was no equipment that wouldn't break or shatter. However, as his natural healing abilities greatly increased, he felt like he became a troll. The consumed stamina normally returned back to normal with about an hour or two of rest. Most wounds healed within half a day. Only if I could collect the set equipment. All he did was put on the armor, but Muyong's strength increased rapidly. He couldn't even imagine how strong he might be if he was to collect 4 more equipment that relinquished the strength of the immortal king. However, this was the part Muyong was unsure on. He inwardly shook his head. Why it had the strength of the immortal king and why it was considered as a set equipment. Immortal king. He never even heard of the name. If it was Muyong who already experienced death once, in some ways he could be considered immortal, however, he didn't believe his strength could exhibit that much of a distinct characteristic. When he thought back, it felt strange. If he was told to reenact it, he probably couldn't. To suppress the heart of the phoenix and to fill it with his own color. He felt as though he acted as if he was bewitched by someone. Thump. 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 Dwarves smacked their shields and weapons loudly. Before fighting, it was kind of a way of showing respect to Muyong. It was dwarves' traditional way of saying they acknowledged Muyong as a true warrior. Then, the 10 dwarves lifted their feet. Muyong got rid of his distracting thoughts and focused on the fight. If it wasn't for Wuhi who suddenly appeared, he would have been fiercely fighting a tight match. Husband! Husband! Something big happened. With gold rings on her neck and gold necklaces around her belly, Wuhi hurriedly flew towards him. What's wrong? Gulp. As Muyong asked, Wuhi gulped her saliva. Haa. Haa. There is a big problem. This isn't the time for us to be like this. This isn't the time for us to be like this. Barca appeared. Wuhi's words had a huge ripple effect. Dark Dragon Barca. He finally appeared. Including Muyog, all the dwarves surrounding him started to make a noise. However, they weren't scared like the last time. It's the effect of brainwashing. Secretly, Muyong brainwashed the dwarves that the dragon wasn't such a big deal. By pushing them to their limits and speaking a word afterwards was enough. The words that were engraved in their minds controlled their instincts before they knew it. Muyong asked with a straight face. And its location? It's almost here. It's probably getting ready. Wuhi tried her best to approach it, but Barca became aware and so she couldn't. Instead, I saw other monsters. There were wyverns, wind rides, and thunder bats. Gibberish. Wuhi's body was shivering. It couldn't be helped as it wasn't like fairies could dodge all attacks. Monsters that were born as half-transcendental species like the dragon could destroy fairies or the trials the fairies created. Since there were already numerous fairies who were attacked by the dragon in the past, it would be a lie if she said she wasn't afraid. However, she took courage and checked nearby. Good work. Muyong placed his hand on top of Wuhi's head. Then, Wuhi's shivers slowly stopped. Afterwards, he turned around and yelled. Prepare for the castle war. This fight was going to be the castle war that would end this long and tiresome relationship between the dwarves and the dragon. Thump. The dwarves were stomping their shields onto the ground with a hardened look on their faces. The dragon was no longer an opponent they needed to avoid as they were reborn as warriors through Muyong. It was a hardship they need to face and win. It was at that moment. Dwarves' Castle War. It just popped up as a quest. It meant that if he was to solve this, there would be a lot of advantages to be earned. However, it wasn't an easy task. The dark dragon Barca is accompanied by monsters. Dragons were normally monsters that moved alone. However, he could handle so many monsters depending on how he looked at things. The dragon was that sort of existence. One of the monsters that were at the top of the food chain. If it was accompanied by those numbers, it meant that it was determined to destroy the dwarves. It probably was really enraged by being toyed with by Bartas. Go up the castle. Get the cannon ready. The dwarves started to move in an organized order. With Muyong's help, their system had changed and allowed them to distribute the work more effectively. Although it has only been 68 days, they were desperate. Then, a huge castle wall over a good 20 meters shined and a magical barrier was created. It was a wall built to maximize the defense against the dragon's attack. It wouldn't collapse easily. Dwarves climbed up the castle wall and loaded a few hundred cannons. The rest of the dwarves protected the cannons or held a crossbow. We must win. Muyeong squeezed his fists to the point it was as if his bones would shatter. Even if he was to exhibit all of his ability, he wasn't sure if he could win. However, he needed to. Even if it wasn't possible, he needed to make it possible. Hunt the dragon. It doesn't lack to be my opponent as the king of the specters. I feel impatient already. Tack in. The evil spirit predator and one that managed Cerberus was truly strong. However, he had a critical weakness. He couldn't recognize his opponent's strength and would attack. If Bartas was to attack it now, he would only be beaten to death. I need you to do something else. Muyeong spoke coldly. Then, Takin tilted his head. Wasn't it my task to handle the dragon? Not now. Then. I need you to disperse the enemies. With the mutants, attack the enemy's rear. The dark dragon Barca didn't know any tactics or strategies. He would probably rush into it at once. However, that would be dangerous. The number of enemies was greater than he thought and the flying-type monsters were basically natural enemies of the dwarves. He needed to disperse the numbers even by a little to raise his chance of winning. Takin accepted with difficulty. I don't like it as a king, but if you want it, I shall. But, Muyeong, are you planning to stay here? I will command from here. The reason why the dwarves changed was solely because of Muyeong. If Muyeong was to vacate his place, their fighting spirit would greatly decrease. It was also Muyeong's first time in leading and fighting with this great of a number. However, he couldn't do a shabby job just because it was something he had never done before. Swoosh! Muyeong took out Anguish and the Wicked God's sword. At the same time, small spots started to flood in from the sky. And the dark dragon Barca was in the lead. I will beat you. It wasn't like he hadn't fought a dragon in the past. When he was facing the Dragon Lord, the demon dragon was the biggest obstacle. Its armor was outstanding and even its existence was so powerful that it could even hunt transcendental species. However, even the powerful demon dragon wasn't complete. In the end, the Dragon Lord was assassinated by Muyeong and afterwards the demon dragon had also died. When they were together, he thought they were unbeatable, but once he faced them individually, it wasn't as hard as he expected. This fight was in a much better position than that time. At least, there were lots of options Muyeong could use. Although his current strength fell far short from his past strength, compared to the hardships in the past, it was easier. Muyeong focused on Barca. Roar! The dark dragon Barca spouted out a rough breath. Chapter 94, Dwarves Castle War, 2. TL, Yoni. Editor, Lee Suris. The dark dragon Barca let out a heavy breath. It was a dragon's strongest attack called the Dragon's Breath. Roar! The huge castle wall started to shake. Amazingly, the castle walls which God Hand Bartas devoted himself in making didn't collapse right away. Dozens of magic barriers overlapped and rose. It was protecting them from the dragon's breath. Beautiful. The scene of dozens of blue magical barriers rose all together was quite beautiful in Muyeong's eyes. The number was exactly 50. It was no different than having 50 walls placed very closely together with only a thin gap in between them. Bartas was truly worthy to be called God Hand. It was possible only because he had the knowledge of both construction and magic. Clank! Clank! Crack! However, the 50 walls couldn't withstand the cruel dragon's breath. The first one broke, then another, and instantly the third wall had collapsed. Not only were the walls huge but so was Barca. Barca was slightly smaller than that but was big enough to terrify others. It isn't as great as Arukasha, the demon dragon the Dragon Lord tamed. If there was hope, it was the fact that Muyang hasn't faced a stronger dragon than it. The demon dragon Arukasha. It was the owner of the active volcano that poured darkness, which was a restricted area within the demon god's territory. It turned down any living being from approaching and used liches to manage the death's territory. So many guilds sent out large personnel to conquer the active volcano that poured darkness, but they all failed. Afterwards, for revenge, Arukasha led an army of the dead and invaded the humans' territory. That was how Arukasha destroyed more than 20 huge guilds and clans. It was the event that led to the restructure of all the organization's rank. It was a monster easily in between the 5th level top rank and the transcendental. It could only be controlled when 7 out of 10 top humans came forth. However, it couldn't be killed. Arukasha ran far away and subsequently, no one knew how the Dragon Lord found and tamed it. Only Muyang, who took a peek at the Dragon Lord's status viewer, knew roughly of what happened. Either way, compared to Arukasha, the dark dragon Barca, the difference was like an adult compared to a child. Even then, it was true that it was terribly strong, but if it was weaker than Arukasha, it was definitely doable. Muyang could be certain since he personally faced Arukasha. 3 years. The time I observed the Dragon Lord and Demon Dragon Arukasha. From all the assassinations Muyang had completed, killing the two was the most difficult task. He knew of the Dragon Lord and Demon Dragon Arukasha's every behavior and even the smallest habits. He couldn't be certain if it could be applied to other dragons, but he thought it was worth a try. The dragon's breath can't last for a long time. Continue to shoot cannons in its mouth. Clank. Crack. In a blink of an eye, about 15 magical barriers cracked and broke off. There were 35 left. Before they all disappeared, he needed to place a few hits. We will die. We will all die. A dwarf who climbed up the castle wall shivered his body. The dwarves' number was approximately 24,000. Even if Muyang trained them, it wouldn't have the same effect on everyone. There were going to be dwarves like him who didn't overcome their fear for the dragon. As if he made a frantic last-ditch effort, he swayed the waters. Let's run away? Please? Logically, how can dwarves win against a dragon? No matter how much we try, our opponent is a dragon. Why do you think Bartas didn't fight it all this time? It all became strange after that Dakibi appeared. Dragons and dwarves are different from birth. Stab. Muyang stabbed a sword into his mouth. Gulke. The moment the fallen dwarf was about to scream, Muyang quietly jumped up the castle wall. Slash. And with the sword that was still stuck in the dwarf's mouth, he sliced off his head. Soon, numerous specters went into his body through the open neck. Boom! It popped. The flesh pieces from the dead body scattered and spread all around them. Beside it, Muyang's image was as grotesque as ever. I can't have him reduce the fighting spirit. During a battle, he needed to kill his allies who lowered their fighting spirit. No matter what the reason was. All the dwarves who looked at Muyang were shivering. Getting killed by the dragon is going to be less painful than to be killed by me. And it would be more honorable to die by fighting than to die while running away. It's your only chance to end this ill-fated relationship with the dragon. Are you going to run away this time as well? Muyang spoke quietly but with strength. Are you planning to live the rest of your lives as slaves? Always remain as cowards, fugitives. Fight. Battle. They are disregarding dwarves. They are mocking Heimdall's name. Even I, a Dakibi, knows of this truth. But are you trying to turn your back on a chance that only came after a few hundred years? Damn it! Bring more arrows. How long before you bring me the large crossbow? Hurry and drag it here. There, as if you shove it, move the cannon. Shove a cannon in its mouth. Dwarves were fired up. Castle war. Like the name itself. If they were to lose now, there was no other chance. All the dwarves knew of this truth. It wasn't going to be solved even if they run away. They needed to win. That was the only way they could live. Although they were vexed, Muyeong's words were all true. Here, in the underworld, the dwarves' standing was weak. All the other species thought of dwarves as slaves or fugitives. If they didn't get rid of their bad habit, their future was dark. The oil is poured. Dwarves were burning up fiercely. If these flames would eliminate them or burn up even their opponent, he needed to wait and see how it goes. Taken led the mutants and moved. Taken, who was a death knight and an evil spirit predator, could place specters in mutants to strengthen them. Since flame mutants were made by combining fire tars and avengers, they were enough to attack the enemies from behind. Kala, before he pops out, I need to secure my place here. The dragon hunt was also meaningful to Taken. The three sovereigns of Azura's path. Taken was one of the three, but soon enough, the one called Kala will show himself. Kala was a sovereign who was competing with Taken. Their relationship was extremely ill and they had the tendency to hate and have a grudge on each other even over little things. If Kala was to hear that Taken had killed a dragon before him, his expression would be nice to look at. Even for the sake of watching that face, he needed to succeed in this dragon hunt. The other sovereign, Muyeong, would he be able to awaken even him? Taken thought of Muyeong, and then shook his head. Although Muyeong's soul was deeper and was more full of mysteries than anyone else, still he was skeptical. He was the best out of all three sovereigns and was sealed in Azura's path for eternity. Due to the wrath of a god. It was on a much different level than himself or Kala. Even if it was Muyeong, he wouldn't be able to break his seal. Taken clicked his tongue. After all, they were all useless thoughts. Right now, it was time to attack the dark dragon Barca's back. Slash! He swung his huge long sword once. Then, a powerful wind force sprang forth and sliced a wing of a wyvern in the air. Afterwards, specters appeared on the both sides of Taken and created a form of wings. Let's go! The same form of wings was created for dozens of mutants and Cerberus. They wouldn't last long, but from the beginning, he wasn't planning to fight them for a long time. Hoo! Splat! With Cerberus releasing flames and lightning, the fight had started. The walls the dwarves made was stronger than it seemed. It was also something that hurt Barca's pride. However, it couldn't endlessly maintain its dragon's breath. Eventually, Barca roared after it stopped its dragon's breath. However, it didn't seem like it gave up. With its claws, Barca grabbed a wyvern flying near it. Crackle! Crack! Then, it dumped it in its mouth and swallowed it whole. Depending on the type, dragons had their special characteristic. If the demon dragon could handle the strength of darkness, the dark dragon Barca could absorb health. And Barca's absorb was superior than other dark dragons. Crackle! Crack! After swallowing numerous thunder bats, dark lightning raged around Barca. It was so. Barca was able to copy the ability of what it swallowed for a short period. Even more, its destructive power was proportional to Barca's strength. It was a variable even Muyeong couldn't think of. It was Barca's authority that not even dwarves were well aware of. Hoo! Once again, Barca accumulated for its breath. And with the strength of thunder and lightning, it poured its breath straight towards the wall. Kaboom! Muyeong scrunched his eyebrows. Out of 50 magical barriers, 30 of them were instantly destroyed. Just after one shot, it happened as Barca used the strength of thunder and lightning with his dragon's breath. It was lunch. Muyeong noticed Barca's change at once. And why he came with numerous of monsters. Those monsters were all a lunch for Barca. It was obvious that it purposely brought them in order to exhibit the characteristic of a dark dragon. He never thought it could even copy the ability of the opponent it absorbed, but it wasn't an all-around skill. It can't absorb two abilities at once and reproduce them. Wyverns were oddly a monster with earth attributes rather than the wind. However, Barca only exhibited lightning attributes. It meant that it could only copy one type of ability at a time. Without copying, it couldn't easily destroy the magical barriers with his breath. What should he do? Muyang rubbed his chin. Zap. Z-zap. Yow, it hurts. Hing. Why is it suddenly acting like this? At that moment, Wu-He shivered her whole body and let out her dissatisfaction. It was just that the metals that Wu-He were wearing were creating an odd reaction. He wasn't sure where she got them from, but static was continuously arising from the metals. After looking at the scene, Muyang quickly turned his head. "Bring me iron pillars now," and ordered the dwarves nearby. Dwarves moved orderly and brought out numerous steel pillars that were approximately 2 m tall. Muyang, who saw them, gave out his next order. "Distribute and place the pillars on top of the castle walls. You must place them widely apart from one another. Is there a reason why you place these there? I have no time to explain. Hurry." Muyang was after lightning rods. Lightning and thunder could only react to metal conductors, and the lightning rods that were placed in different areas would divide the strength of the lightning and thunder. Dwarves also knew of its principle, but because they were so lost in this battle they just weren't able to realize it. After a while, the lightning rods were placed in different areas of the castle walls and the strength of the lightning and thunder subsided. The attack has weakened. The pillars are working. The spirit of the dwarves rose once more. Then, as if the dark dragon also realized something odd, it stopped its breath for a moment. It is probably planning to eat up other monsters. For now, they were done defending against thunder and lightning attributes. However, there was still earth attributes which the wyverns had and the wind attributes from wind rides. However, both attributes were weak against one attribute. Earth and wind attributes are all weak against dark attributes. That was the interrelations between attributes. And darkness was a field Muyang was most confident with. It will be a muddy fight. Before all the magical barriers got destroyed, he was planning to reduce Barca's power to the best he could. And to do this, he was prepared to even enter the mud. Swoosh! He took out his sword. Now, it was time for Muyang to take an active part. Chapter 94, Dwarves Castle War, End. TL, Yoni and Empty Cube. Editor, Lee Suris. The magic that the dragons used was purer than anything else. That was why there was quite a firm difference in terms of superiority among their attributes. Muyang went up the castle walls and made thousands of specters surround him. As he was surrounded by a black fog, Muyang's whole body was completely black. If my magic resistance didn't pass 200 with the wicked god's sword, I wouldn't even try, but right now, when it's above 200, he could at least deal with it for a bit. Muyang declared the Absolute's territory. The surrounding pressure of magic became disorganized, and with Muyang in the middle, all the attacks were weakened. After Muyang looked straight at Barca, he continued to build specters. Thicker, stronger. A skill was created. Was it because he has been using the specters for quite a while? Or was it because he acted in a certain way? Either way, it was rare for a skill to be created like this. On top of that, it was instantly decided as AC rank when it was created. The effect of 5 Qi. Muyang nodded his head. Purity. Through 5 Qi, Muyang's basic skills had all been raised to C rank in the past. Above all, it would take an average of 3 years for a normal person to learn a skill. A person needed to indefinitely repeat and research in order to earn a skill regarding it. Compared to this, Muyang was much better off. Although he didn't intend for this to happen, he accepted it as if it was an obvious thing. Soon, a fog made up of specters built a strong wall and blocked his front. What's that? I'm getting goosebumps. From the sooty wall, different kinds of faces seemed like they were going to pop out with their mouths open. Its appearance was completely eerie. Dwarven bodies shivered instantly when they looked at it. Certainly, it was a skill that was eye-catching. Give me Bartas. Then, I will let you live. Suddenly, Muyong could hear a voice in his head. Barca. Muyong immediately knew that the voice inside his head was Barca. Since there weren't many magical barriers left, it probably became possible for it to deliver his message. You have no chance of winning. Just open the gates and accept me. With Bartas's life, you could all live. Don't be fooled by its skillful words. Muyong yelled right away. Barca's message echoed in the hearts of the people. It was because the presence of a dragon was passed on directly. Dragon's words. The words a dragon spoke had weight. A forceful order was planted in people's mind. But, that didn't mean that everything it said was true. Even if they handed Bartas to Barca, it wouldn't save the rest of the dwarves. If it did let them live, he would use them as slaves right up to their deaths. Don't listen to the words of the dragon. Muyong spoke again to the dwarves who were making a noise. Why would Barca negotiate now? It's because it's beyond his power. It's because the dwarves' resistance was greater than it imagined. So, it has no choice but to toss a bait. Have you ever seen a dragon who truly negotiated? We are almost there. Barca was taken back. Muyong could see it. As he said, if it did have enough strength, it wouldn't even try to negotiate like this. It would have destroyed them with no questions like it did in the beginning. However, it changed its route. To make the dwarves open their gates, it even mixed dragon's words in order to send its message. It was bluffing. For Barca, it was something that really hurt its pride. However, since that didn't even work, it was too clear in Muyong's eyes what it was going to do next. You are so foolish. You are bringing death upon yourselves. Kwa woo. Barca opened its mouth wide. It gathered its strength to use and the earth and the sky started to shake. Muyong raised his wall of specters higher. A single round match. He just needed to block it just this once. Even if it was possible to absorb, there was a limit. It wasn't infinite. It was the same for the demon dragon Arukasha. Its dark demon power was used up to a certain point and it could only run away. Swoo! Smack! Then, a long sword suddenly flew in from somewhere. And, it pierced through the flesh near Barca's neck and became stuck. One who could damage the skin of a dragon. There weren't many who could succeed by throwing their weapon. Muyong looked at Takan who triumphantly flapped its black wings like a devil from afar. As if he had helped him. It did help. Muyong silently replied and focused all his strength. Soon, the dragon's breath reached the magical barrier and the wall of specters. Rumble. Crack. Crackle. All the magical barriers were broken. The wall of specters shook wildly. Muyong clenched his teeth. His teeth broke and his nails cracked away. Both his hands and shoulders he used to raise the wall of specters were flushed red. However, it was more endurable than he had thought. Takan reduced Barca's focus and due to it, Barca's explosive power was weakened. Barca thought that it was hard to break through the wall of specters and stopped his dragon's breath. Kwa. At the same time, it cried. It exploded as nothing was happening as it planned. I will kill you all. Muyong smiled. He directly stopped Barca's attack. No matter the process, this truth was enough. I can't believe it. I'm not seeing things, right? He stopped a dragon's breath alone. There were some exaggerations but Muyong didn't try to clarify. Instead, he screamed loud like an explosion. Raise your weapons. Its strength is gone. The magical barriers were all broken. If they were to just stand there it would the same as being defeated. Even if it did use up its strength, a dragon was a dragon. However, Muyong personally showed that they could win and from there, the dwarves felt hope. Clank. Clonk. They all held a weapon and a shield. Yes. We have Muyong. We can do it. We can really do it. It was a moment where Muyoung's presence suddenly rose. They were prepared to run out with their hardened faces. Then, Muyoung continued to speak. It's the start of the counterattack. Blurb. The horn was blown. A true castle war had started. Almost 10,000 casualties. The number of enemies had also decreased to about a half. And Muyoung was ruling the war. He took out all his cards to stop Barca. Flame Mutants, Black Sun Warrior, Heidegger, Taken, and Cerberus. And even the Hell Horse. Your worst natural enemies are undead. The Dark Dragon Barca's best ability was absorption. It absorbed the life of others and recovered its stamina and used their abilities as its own. However, undead were already dead beings. How could Barca absorb life from opponents that didn't have 1 ounce of life? Barca's biggest natural enemies were undead, and Muyoung. Using its huge wings, Barca smacked its surrounding. Whenever it did, all kinds of specters, evil spirits, and undead clung to it to restrict its movement. As Barca felt desperate, it tried swallowing undead, but it was no use. It slowly broke away from the battleground and was now fighting Muyoung alone. In other words, it meant that there were no living creatures around it to swallow. A dark dragon's basic stamina wasn't high. Dragons were a top-rank species, and when they have a cheat skill like Absorb, they don't really need to improve their basic stats. Since dark dragons were able to exhibit stronger power than their opponent had by absorbing. And that arrogance currently held Barca back. Barca flapped its wing greatly. It realized that it didn't have a chance like this. However, Muyoung wasn't well off either. Already, few hundreds of undead were destroyed. Go! When Muyoung ordered, the Black Sun Warrior started to move. Now, all the undead climbed up Barca's back. It was the same for Muyoung. I need to stall for time. Up to now, it went as he planned. The problem was that he needed to withstand 30 more seconds. It was planned for the Demon Dragon lethal cannon to be shot here. That was why he needed to make sure Barca didn't leave this area and avoid the Demon Dragon lethal cannon when it was launched. Barca shot his last breath everywhere. Whenever it flocked its wings, dozens of undead made it fall closer to the ground, and everything that was touched by the breath got destroyed. Muyoung clenched his teeth and used his sword. I need to endure it. He wagered everything in this one shot. If he failed, there was nothing left. The rest will lose their fighting power and will wait for Barca's attack while they suck on their thumbs. Dragons were a species with a strong thirst for revenge. It would never let Muyoung go. Rumble. Every time the Hellhorse kicked from the side, black lightning would strike down. Although Barca opened its maw to eat the Hellhorse, it was impossible since its movements were constricted. The Hellhorse was doing its job well. It was definitely worth using his second request. 25 seconds, 26 seconds, 27 seconds. Now. Muyoung, who had finished counting exactly 30 seconds, kicked off Barca's back as he saw a light approaching from afar. Even the undead jumped down as soon as they received Muyoung's message. However, not all were able to jump down. Around half of the undead accompanied Barca as they were hit by the exploding light beam. Shwa-ya-ya. The strong light instantly engulfed the territory hole. Once the light had swept through, a hole was pierced in the sky and destroyed everything in its path. Even the great dark dragon Barca was unable to endure that light. Nothing remained in the places the light had swept past. The dragon's leather, its bones, and even the countless undead, all disappeared as if they had evaporated. All that remained was a peaceful silence. Muyoung, who had dropped on the ground, gazed at his left hand. It burned off. His arm had vanished precisely up to his left elbow. Only a thick, burnt smell remained. It seemed he wasn't able to completely get out of the Demon Dragon lethal cannon's area of attack. Seeing as he didn't feel any pain, it seemed as though even his nerves had been damaged. Muyoung frowned. Thud. The next moment, something fell in front of his eyes. Thump! Thump! The falling object beat violently as it revealed its life force. Myung, who saw this, couldn't help but shiver. As someone who had awakened their purity, Myung could instantly tell that the object in front of him possessed a very noble, pure power. Only this remained after everything of the dragon had been destroyed. The dragon's heart. It was precisely the heart of the dragon. Myung's heart beat furiously as well. It was an object that was said to be impossible to obtain. This was said to be second to that of the phoenix's heart, perhaps possessing an even greater power. A dragon would personally destroy its heart before it died. It was because they possessed a personality that extremely despised getting used by others and because they knew the value of their hearts better than anyone else. However, Barca didn't have any time to prepare. The moment it noticed the light, it had been too late. If Myung had been a little late, his entire body would have been destroyed. He was lucky to have only lost his left hand. However, it seemed even the demon dragon lethal cannon was unable to extinguish this noble and pure power. Ha! Myung smirked. They say if you lose something, you will gain something else. There were many stories of heroes who became strong by obtaining a dragon's heart. What could make a normal person possess the power of 100 men was precisely a dragon's heart. Because of this, it was an object everyone hungered after, and wars frequently broke out for a single heart. This was what was in front of Myung. Myung's eyes that gazed at the dragon's heart glittered brilliantly. Chapter 96, On a Different Level, 1. TL, Yoni. Editor, Lee Suras. Although Myung said it was a heart, it was more close to a gem. Fitting its name as Dark Dragon, it was a black hexagonal-shaped treasure. The size was at most 1 span wide. However, it couldn't be ignored. It shined like the Star of David, and although its main body had died, it was a source of life that continued to pump. An infinite amount of magical power was stored inside. Dragon's heart wasn't also called the gem of the sage for no reason. The ones who have the dragon's heart, 9 out of 10 died. It was accepted as a fact of life. Dragon's heart was really rare, but when it rarely did appear, the owner always changed. Even if they did swallow it themselves, they wouldn't win out against the strength of the heart and their body would burst. It was truly something that they weren't willing to keep or give up. Myung slowly reached his hand out and held the heart. Ba dum. Ba dum. He couldn't tell if it was the sound of his heart or the sound of the dragon's heart. Myung was captivated by its strange light. However, his mind wasn't overwhelmed. As his mind enhanced, Myung's eyes became colder. Is that the dragon's heart? Taken approached him. Thankfully, he and Cerberus seemed to have escaped the danger of the demon dragon lethal cannon. However, Taken was different from Myung. He was drawn to the appeal of the dragon's heart. Taken looked at the treasure Myung was holding with eyes that were overflowing with greed. Really, it really is beautiful. It seems like it's worth more than any treasure on Azura's path. It's like an artwork made by a god. Taken started to move as he was drawn to the heart. For this reason, 9 out of 10 people die after they receive the dragon's heart. The magical power that came out of the heart had charmed everyone around it. It was truly a poisonous flower itself. Swoosh! Myung put the heart away and took out Anguish. Even though his left arm was gone, he was still able to perform 80% of his abilities. Assassins had to know how to deal with all types of situations and had to be prepared even with so many restrictions. His fighting abilities didn't drastically decrease just because he lost an arm. Stop! Let me just look at it. I just want to see it closer. I told you to stop. Swoosh! In time, Myung's sword had touched Taken's soul. Through soul exploitation effect, Myung was able to see the soul of the undead he created. Taken moved his gaze to Myung, as if he was asking the question if Myung was going to really slice his soul. If Myung could really do well without his help. Within a short amount of time, Takan really did give Myung a lot of help. Even looking further, there will be countless times where his strength would be needed. However, Takan soon realized that his thoughts were a mistake. Myung's hand moved a little closer. Myung's eyes didn't flicker. He wasn't one to hesitate about slicing someone. He was totally heartless and cold. Takan's body shivered as he looked at Myung's eyes. Azura. Brr. How is it that I see his image overlap with him? The king of every kind of Dakibi. How was it that the appearance of the god who locked him up in Azura's path was projected? Cruel, violent, and completely arrogant, but a ruler with undeniable strength, how could he? Takan stopped his footsteps. His affection towards the dragon's heart disappeared. For a moment, I was blinded. Finally, Takan regained control of himself. His voice had a strong hint of regret. Although there was no expression, Myung thought Takan's face was quite wrinkled up. For someone who is called a sovereign to lose his control over just a treasure, it seemed to have hurt his pride. Takan asked as he took a step back. That treasure makes everything go crazy. How are you going to manage it? Swoosh. Myung sheathed back anguish. I'm going to swallow it. Your body will not be able to cope with the magical power of the treasure. You should know better yourself. He knew. But, he was willing to still try. If he was to achieve second metamorphosis, it was possible that his body will regenerate. It might be safer to create an equipment with the dragon's heart to substitute for his left arm, but that wasn't enough. Myung had a lot of greed. If I am to eat the dragon's heart, I will lose or gain it all. One of the two. Through the dragon's heart, he was going to attempt to regenerate his body. Also, it was told that if someone was successful in accepting a dragon's heart, there was a low chance of achieving a skill related to a dragon's ability. Myung moved without speaking. The war has not ended yet. What do you think? Are you talking about the gem of the sage he earned? If he was to swallow it, he wouldn't survive. It is a future that is already decided. It's not like he is our only candidate. It's poison to collect all strengths in one direction. The student Merlin just took in, I like him. Merlin? The magician in the blue temple. However, that guy is half evil. We can't trust him. How about the girl who is the successor of Light? She also did have quite the potential. If we help her to learn the instructions on Light, she is easily able to become a saint. As I recall, didn't she have connections with the Death Lord's messenger? Stop. People, my messenger did not die yet. And as a reward, we could give him something that could neutralize the dragon's heart. Death Lord, are you saying we should give him the potion of God? It is prohibited to give such a favor. Even with my name on the line? I am the incarnate of death, Arda. Stop. It is against the law to mention your true name. If your mind is that determined, then release the restriction, Death Lord. If I remember correctly, we each had authority to change matters of the other world. Death Lord, I believe you still have one chance left? Spirit Sovereign, you bastard. It doesn't seem like you are willing to release the restriction. Now, let's discuss what reward we are going to give him. Since he did have a crucial role in killing the dragon and winning the castle war, I'm thinking of giving him the Spirit Baron. What do you guys think? Spirit Baron? Are you talking about that taboo spirit? It's more than enough as a reward. Then, I will understand that everyone besides Death Lord accepts. Wait. Kingslayer, what is it? That restriction, I will release it. You will? Is it that surprising? You have never released the restriction before. Although others used it at least once. I just never had a reason to use it. And Myung didn't know how to use my strength properly. I will use this opportunity to show him. What does he have that makes you, Kingslayer, obsess about? Although the human called Myung is great, he is still just a human. Isn't he not that big of a deal for you, the noblest knight, to obsess about? He told me. He will not break. I just thought it was a waste for him to die now. Also, there is something I need to check in person. All the dwarves cried out loud. That they had won. They had ended the few hundreds of years of vice. The death of Dark Dragon Barca would not end as just a death of one dragon. Other dragons will know of this truth and dwarves would no longer need to be fugitives. Dragon Slayer. Dragon Slayer. However, someone else was a critical role in their victory. Dwarves all gathered around Muyong. Muyong raised anguish up high. At the same time, first to be activated was the King Slaughterer effect. Before, when he killed the Lizard King, his strength went up by 5, but this was an increase incomparable. It seemed like all dragons were acknowledged as kings. It meant that it would still work if he was to kill another dragon. Then, another message appeared. This was also expected. Since it wasn't the first time Muyong had hunted the dragon. Out of the top 10 humans, about half of them had experience in hunting dragons. The achievement effect Muyong earned right now was the same for them. It was different how they hunted dragons after they became strong, but Muyong was successful when all his abilities were quite lacking. Although it was due to the demon dragon lethal cannon, Muyong still took part in all of the process. Killing many birds with one stone. He had hunted a dragon and had gained both the King Slayer's effect and the achievement effect at once. If there was something different, King Slayer raised his pure stats while the achievement effect raised his supporting stats. But, right now, it wasn't important. What Muyong was waiting for was their evaluation. The Masters of Darkness made up of 11 individuals. The reward he received depending on their evaluation could not be ignored. Clank. On one hand, greaves were created. It seemed like the greaves matched his breastplate as if they were naturally a pair. As Muyong concentrated on the equipment, information regarding it appeared. Name, Greaves of Destruction, Baron. Rank, A+++. Classification, Equipable Type. Endurance, 100,000. Effect, Greaves possessed by a Spirit Baron. Asterisk Agility +20. Asterisk Stamina +20. Asterisk Intelligence +30. Asterisk The Spirit Baron can be summoned. The Taboo Spirit Baron attacks without separating enemies from allies. It is highly likely that it will attack the user first. All of the Spirit Baron's stats are determined by doubling of the user's intelligence, at most 500. Stats were prominent, but the last effect was a double-edged sword. Spirit Baron. It was a name he hadn't heard of, but if it was affected by his intelligence, it seems like it was considered as a type of skill. I understand why destruction is part of its name. Still, it said that there was a high chance it would attack the user. If he had the confidence of fleeing after summoning it, it seemed like it could surely be used as a bomb. Muyong removed the knee guard of fresh blood and wore his greaves. Dwarves were instantly confused, but Muyong didn't care. Then, he turned on his status viewer. He wanted to check his final completed stats. Achievement effect. Star of Purity, S, all stats +20, waking phase of the Absolute. Dragon Hunter, A++, all stats +20. Out of the Dragon's Influence. A+, strength +10. Ruler of Dakibus. Grimoire's Anguish, A, +3 to all abilities. Azura's Vassal, A, the strength to deal with spirits and devil's power, spirit ability increased by 10. Soulmate, B+, from now on, if you commune with an undead, the undead's stats will slightly increase permanently. Descendant of Murlocs, B+, increased growth of Murlocs. Fairy's Blessing, B, allows fairies to feel familiar with the user. Class effect. Death Lord, Lord class, Ruler of Death. King Slayer, Lord class, Slayer of Kings. Strength 221, 115 + 106, Agility 196, 109 plus 87. Stamina 181, 94 plus 87, Intelligence 157, 90 plus 67. Wisdom 157, 90 plus 67, Fighting Aura 164, 66 plus 98. Magic Resistance 212, 54 plus 158, Spirit Ability 111, 53 plus 58. Special note, Fighting Aura has been awakened. Completed the first metamorphosis. You have accomplished 3 flowers condensing onto the head and 5 chi and have realized purity. Equipped and invoked equipment. Anguish, Strength plus 14, Ogre's Cruelty. Lunatic Sovereign's Set, all stats plus 15, Stamina plus 10. Immortal King's Breastplate, Strength plus 15, Fighting Aura plus 30, Stamina plus 50, Magic Resistance plus 80, Set Equipment. Wicked Belt, Intelligence and Wisdom plus 4, all undead are strengthened by 5%. Hermes's Boots, Agility plus 15, 3 seconds of acceleration. Skull Accessory, Strength plus 19, Agility plus 4. Greaves of Destruction Baron, Agility and Stamina plus 20, Intelligence plus 30, Summon Baron. Wicked God's Sword, Fighting Aura plus 20, Cry of Battle. Contempt for the Weak, Magic Resistance plus 30, Extortion of Energy, Set Equipment. Starlight, Star of the Absolute all abilities plus 10, Star Looter, Absolute's Territory. As the Kingslayer and Dragon Hunter effects overlapped, he was able to supplement for the most chronic problem of his intelligence and wisdom. For an explorer who hasn't been here for even a year, it was a condition no one would believe. No matter how fast, it would take about 5 years. No, something that needs at least 10 years. Muyeong completed this in less than a year. Still lacking. However, Muyeong was thirsty. It was still far for him to handle everything alone. Muyeong's goal wasn't to be in the top 10 humans. He wanted to be the absolute who could win against demon kings and demon gods alone. For him to accomplish this, he needed to go faster. I will use the little wish to swallow the dragon's heart. And Muyeong held the way to take a leap forward. The dragon's heart. Through it, he was going to get stronger. The world would change. And in it, there was a woman. No, there had to be one. If, it was as usual. Little wish. The tool that would let out a fake image of an angel to grant a small wish. However, the one that appeared wasn't a fake angel or a blue background. Who are you? Chapter 97, On a Different Level, 2. TL, Yoni. Editor, Lee Suras. There was no trace of a woman with wings, but instead, there was a black shadow of a person. As if it was a shadow, only the outline was visible. As a silhouette of a man holding a sword was looking towards Muyeong, he couldn't help but ask. However, the man did not reply. Instead, he held his great sword. With one hand, he easily swung the great sword and suddenly started to attack. Clang! Clang! Rumble! Whenever the man leaped, the ground shook. Everything around was dark, but Muyeong could feel it. Muyeong also took out Anguish. However, it was beyond his capability to block the man's attack with one hand. Are you thinking that you aren't able to block my attack because you have one hand? As if the black shadow could read Muyeong's mind, he spoke. The voice had a lot of noise clustered, but still, it wasn't to the point he couldn't understand. Swaak. Then, the man sliced off his own left arm. As if he was willing to face him with the same condition. And then, when the battle continued, Muyeong couldn't help but feel a shudder. It's sophisticated. It was a continuation of sophisticated attacks without a single error. The man loosened his strength and was facing Muyeong purely by his swordsmanship. But, Muyeong was still unable to strike the man. It was due to the difference of their basic skills. There is a difference in skill itself. Ha! It was funny. Even if he worked as an assassin for over 40 years, Muyoung's knowledge in basic swordsmanship was extraordinary. By watching, he acquainted numerous swordsmanship of strong men and made them his own. The skills Muyoung had come to perfect after improving them himself. But, the man in front of him was on another level. It made it seem like his swordsmanship was poor. The man's blow had all kinds of exquisite principles. He just knew that there were. It was a phenomenon that occurred after he was awakened by purity. But there was no way of knowing what that exquisite principle were. You don't even fully understand what you have. The man's great sword pierced through Muyoung's side. Like a slow motion, it was a move that was absolutely leisurely. He couldn't believe it. With his eyes wide open, Muyoung looked at his side that was pierced. When? It was clearly slow. So slow that he could yawn. But, suddenly it pierced through his body. Was this really something that was possible? It was a sword that was endlessly fast and continued slowly. He thought he was obviously going to block the man's attack, but couldn't. He turned his head and looked at the black shadow. With an expression as if he was about to laugh, the black shadow spoke. Even a slow sword could have few thousands of different alternations. You could also perform this swordsmanship. Muyoung knitted his brows. That slow sword. No matter how many times he looked at it, he couldn't understand it. But, the man said he was able to perform the same. However, Muyoung never pursued slow movements. Only fast. He just mastered how to be elaborate and fast. Since there was nothing else needed besides fast in an assassination. Cough. Muyoung coughed up blood. Because you believe you are perfect, your abilities are stagnant. Your physical might be stronger but your foundation is terrible. No one was able to say that Muyoung's skills were terrible. If anything, wasn't Muyoung's pure skills better than everyone else? That's why he believed that he just needed to regain his previous fighting power. He believed that the only way he could get stronger was to quickly raise his stats. Who are you? Muyoung asked again. However, the answer he heard was different from what he expected. Try to figure it out with a sword. Afterwards, the man raised his great sword. And the sword flew towards him. It was totally relaxed but Muyoung wasn't able to do a thing. In all his life, he had never seen a sword like this. Wang Chunglin was known as a killing machine and even the numerous martial masters who learned martial arts for generations were no better than the man in front of him. It was like the difference between a child and an adult. He was on a different level. It felt like the sky fell down. You are dead. The man spoke as Muyoung's neck was sliced off. With that as an end, Muyoung's consciousness became muddy. Ha! Muyoung quickly lifted his upper body. Lavishing inner castle. Muyoung was completely wet on top of a bed. I clearly remember using the little wish. However, he wasn't able to pray for a wish. He was trying to strengthen his physical for a moment in order to swallow the dragon's heart. But, because of the sudden appearance of a black shadow, it didn't happen. Who was he? The answer he could hear until the end. He said to identify him with only a sword. However, Muyoung was unable to identify him. It was because there was a clear difference in their skills. Clench. Muyoung clenched his teeth tight. If the difference was simply their fighting power, he wouldn't feel this much sense of futility. However, the man fought Muyoung with the same stats. Strength, stamina, agility, etc., they were all the same. As Muyoung faced him, he was able to understand. Would there be a greater humiliation than this? He was confident in his basic skills, but it was demolished without mercy. As if he was mocked, it just swept him and passed by. Conceit? Did I conceit? However, it wasn't rage that felt after the end of humiliation and futility, it was self-reflection. The man also said this. That he was stagnant because he believed he was perfect himself. His words might not be wrong. Didn't he continuously plan to develop himself with external help? It was enough to call it conceit. Swoosh! Myung held anguish, and slowly swirled it. A slow sword. In it, it has a few thousands of different alternations. He never thought a sword that he had never heard of or seen before could exist. It was a fresh shock and he wanted to approach it. That wasn't the end. Whenever Myung fell asleep, the fight with him continued. Only after a few days had passed did Bartas come to see him. However, Bartas could only tilt his head after looking at Myung's face. Is your body okay? For some reason, you don't look so good. Although there were no visible injuries, his dark circles were quite deep. You're later than I thought. I'm sorry. I'm late because I had something to think about. And, thank you. Thanks to you, we were able to win the castle war. It seemed like there was a bit of goodwill towards Myung. First, his gaze and his way of speaking had changed. He was able to feel a sense of genuineness from the way Bartas showed his gratefulness. Speaking of which, do you want anything? If it's something I can do, I am willing to do it. Although the breastplate is already made, but that isn't enough. Not enough. God hand Bartas. The equipment he created were worth 1,000 gold. He had a lot of pride on the work he created. That was why he didn't make equipment for the most request. However, he said that it wasn't enough. Myung started to talk after he thought for a moment. Can I borrow 500 dwarves? Dwarves? I'm a lord who rules over a territory. I live with few thousands of dakibas and thousands of different species. However, their foundation is lacking. I need the work of dwarves. He really wanted them to move their base, but Rome wasn't built in a day. Bartas was the lord of an alliance. Just as there can't be two kings in one mountain, it was best to lend the dwarves for now. If it is for that reason, there is no reason for me to decline. I will lend you 1,000. Bartas quietly murmured to himself that it was a good thing that they got rid of the dark dragon Barca before the devil's long night started. During that time, most monsters refrained their activities, but individuals like dragons were still active. Thank you. You don't have to thank me. Rather, didn't think you were a lord. That was why it didn't seem out of the ordinary for you to manage dwarves. It's nothing. For you, it might be nothing, but for me, for us, it's a great thing. If we didn't stand up then, we would still not be free from being fugitives. Bartas shook his head and cleared his throat as he held out something to Myung. Ahem, please accept this. It was a ring with a unique seal. A dragon was drawn in, but it was so detailed that it looked alive and as if it was about to move. This is. It's a seal that you are a friend of the dwarves. Since I have guaranteed it, no dwarf will be able to disregard you. It seemed like he was late because he was busy making this. Myung grinned and accepted the ring. Not just a friend but a sworn friend. It meant that Myung's worth rose quite a lot during this time. Then, are you going to leave right away? No, there is an item I need to find first. An item you need to find. I will be back within 90 days. It would be nice if you could supply your strength then. I understand. And don't forget. We dwarves are your friend. Myung nodded his head. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. If he was to enhance his relationship with the dwarves, it would become a great help in the future. Things ended faster than I thought. There was over 150 days before the devil's long night started. He couldn't just waste the time he has left. Finally, if it's to the north side, there was something he needed to find. Orus's throne. Lunatic Sovereign's ring, Hamel's rune ring, and Orus's throne ring. There were all items that were needed in order to free Diabolos. And among them, Orus's throne ring was at the north side. For him to return, it would take time, so it would be right for him to find it while he was here. It is also a suitable place to raise basic skills. Myung clenched his fist. He felt he first needed to raise his basic skills before eating the dragon's heart. And take this arm. I made something to replace your left arm. Ahem, there was something useful in the storage room. The item Bartas took out was a left arm. To be exact, it replaced from his elbow of the arm, but it was very exquisite. No, in some ways, it seemed better than the real arm. There was a clear difference in the role of tendons and bones. As he touched it for a moment, he could also feel the pulse that moved. The completely fierce magical powers felt like it touched his skin. It didn't make sense that something like this would roll around in the storage. It definitely was something Bartas used all his strength to make. Bartas probably felt bad about the left arm that flew away when he was fighting the dark dragon Barca. Dwarves are deeply affectionate once you befriend them. Dwarves were famous for repaying their debts to their enemies, and their friends. It was hard to befriend them at first, but once you befriended them, they were famous for helping you most of the time. It seemed like Bartas's heart was opened out to him. He was shy to say that he created it, so he sort of made it up. I can feel a strength out of the ordinary. I have added the tendons of a phoenix and wyvern king's heart. To know how well it fits your body, you need to wear it. But, the biggest output can even destroy a small mountain. Myung was able to feel the pride in his voice. It seemed like he created the breastplate with the heart of the phoenix and used the tendons left to make the left arm. On top of that, a wyvern king's heart. He could only be surprised about this part. It was an extremely rare mutant-type monster that could also be called the Emperor of the Sky. Although it wasn't as good as a dragon, it didn't change the fact that it was a monster out of the monsters. It was huge and also was able to release the breath. When he categorized it in a rank, it was more than enough to be in the top rank. It would have been hard to even find it, but Bartas generously used this precious material. On top of that, since Bartas's skills were added, there was nothing more to say. It probably wasn't a lie that it could even destroy a mountain. Then, Bartas gave Myung a look. As if he was encouraging Myung to try it on. To wear it for a while, it's perfect. Chapter 98, On a Different Level, 3. TL, Yoni. Editor, Lee Suras. To wear it while preparations were completed, it was perfect. And Myung was worried. The black shadow that popped out as he used the little wish. He continued to talk. To strengthen his basic skills. To not think so hastily. Like a teacher, he was trying to teach Myung. And he was surely qualified. He was more superior than any human Myung had faced up until now. When he realized up to that point, Myung couldn't help but laugh in vain. The one I need to face isn't a human. It was true. It was indeed true. How did humanity collapse so easily like it did? It was because the strength of the demon kings and demon gods were beyond one's imaginations. Top 10 humans? For them, it would be too much to face one demon king. If they desperately tried, then at most 2. Even that was a 50/50 chance. Wasn't it obvious that they couldn't even dream of beating a demon god? Just Gremory alone had 26 demon kings and their armies. But, Myung thought only as far as the standards of a human. Basic skills. That might be superior to any humans. If he used the standards of a demon king or demon god, then, well. I don't know them well. Myung had faced humans. Just the assassination of humans. It wasn't like he didn't face monsters, but demon gods were truly gods. It was unfit to consider it as a monster. To act on the superiority of one's stats were the limits of humans. They acted because they didn't know. The black shadow was pointing to those mistakes of Myung. The world doesn't revolve around you. He urged himself. Basic skills were harder to master as he gained more strength and become more powerful. It meant that if it wasn't now, he would have to go around a much longer path. Instead, by fighting the black shadow, he realized that not being so hasty was the way to go through a much shorter path. Myung was making a big mistake because he ran without a delay. That the world ran with him, the only one who returned from the future, as the center. However, the enemy was powerful, strong, and endless. The dragon's heart. The treasure also called the gem of the sage. Perhaps the black shadow was telling him that it wasn't time yet. To not be too dependent on outer strengths. That only when he, himself, can fully control it, then would he be able to exhibit his true strength. He continued to express that sort of will. So, he was planning to use this left arm until he could fully control it. Myung. As Myung was deep in his thoughts, God Hand Bartas spoke as he was puzzled. Cluck. Myung escaped from his thoughts and wore the left arm. It fits perfectly. It's the characteristics of that phoenix. The tendons automatically change to fit the user. There was no need to use the tendons on the breastplate, so I didn't use it. I didn't just leave it out. I know. From the beginning, it was a breastplate that matched Myung's body. There was no reason for tendons to be included. On the other hand, this hand needed to move quite freely. It had a different use. I'm glad you know it. Now, you just need to endure it. It was at that moment. From the arm, tendons sprouted out and wrapped Myung's left shoulder. And touched each and every nerve and slowly started to assimilate. As if he was burnt by fire, the pain swept over him. He felt like all the heat from his body was all gathered to his left arm. Myung clenched his teeth. Cold sweat dripped down from his body. Tendons that popped out like tentacles were rooted through Myung's whole body. It settled down once the assimilation was completed, but Myung kept twitching his whole body. After watching him, Bartas was all amazed. Ha! I thought the assimilation rate would be around 90%, but by looking at you it seems like you passed 95%. The Azure Sky King's left arm was attached to Myung's left side as if it was his real arm. Although the veins of the part that connected to his arm were more bulging, he could barely feel the difference. Crack! As he grabbed the side of the desk, it broke as it was. It felt like he was touching the sand. Although he didn't control his strength properly, it was still strong. Then, as he looked at Bartas, Bartas laughed out loud. Even though the outer appearance isn't that greatly different from your arm, the interior is completely different. To withstand the twin-head ogres and your muscles, I used Orm as its backbone. He seemed very proud. Twin-head ogres were known as the strongest monster simply by looking at their strength. On top of that, if it was Orm, it was a mid-legend class or. If he simply calculated, this one arm was basically worth a castle. Even if he was the Lord of the Alliance, it would have been a heartbreaking expense. However, Bartas's expression didn't show any signs of it being a waste. It's too good of an arm. If you think of it as a price for helping God Hand Bartas, it is quite cheap. It would take a bit of time for you to get used to it. Myung nodded his head. Truly, there was a bit of a difference. To control his strength, it seemed like he needed to put a bit of effort. Not bad. Instead, it was a problem that it was too good. It seemed like he could quickly control his powers. He basically added another thing to learn to control. Also, the Azure Sky King's left arm was the work only the God Hand Bartas could create. To earn it for a bargain didn't make any sense. It was obvious that it needed some effort. Strength fixed at 300. Fixed meant that other effects didn't work. Myung's current strength was 221. It didn't balance. But, the ends of Myung's lips were raised instead. It should be fun. Myung's competitiveness escalated as there were more tasks he needed to overcome. Reality clearly influenced his dream world. As he earned the Azure Sky King's left arm, his dream world would have also been projected as it was. And in his dream world, Myung met him once again. The Black Shadow. The shadow whose deep eyes were the only thing visible. You earned quite an amusing toy. The man's sword was still slow. Sometimes he approached him like a river, like a lake, or like a vast ocean. But, Muyong was still unable to block him. Did you think you could find a way if you used two arms? I just wanted to check the gap more clearly. No matter how strong he was, even when he used the Azure Sky King's breath, he wasn't able to reach the man. Muyong already knew that he couldn't do it. But, he realized something as he used two arms. So, did you realize the difference between you and me? A bit. Oh. The man was in awe. What is it? The sword. The sword. You know the sword better than me. It was true. Muyong knew that their understanding itself was different. The man was a sword master, who surpassed the limits. It felt like he even knew the breadth of the sword. It was an impossible artistry as a human. To know the breadth of the sword and to move as if he was one body with it. However, that wasn't all. Muyong had no idea how that sort of artistry was possible. The man smiled. It is difficult to accept something that is out of their perception. It is an amazing talent for you to know even that. So, I will specially give you some advice. And spoke quietly. You can't hear the sound of a sword. The sound of a sword? A sword did not have any sound. No, it wasn't alive. There were specific sounds that a simple lump of metal could produce. However, it didn't seem like he was referring to that sound. I have died 8 times. However, the man didn't reply to Muyong. Instead, Muyong was swept by a huge tidal wave. The man could become a mountain, a sky, and even an ocean. Cow! Muyong let out a cry as he lifted his upper body. It seems like you had another bad dream. Beside him, Takan spoke. Kalmu stayed at the castle to raise his skills. So, only Muyong and Takan rode on Cerberus and were headed to the deeper parts of the north. Takan, have you heard the sound of a sword? If it's a sword possessed by specters, I have heard them often. No, it's not those. The sound of a sword itself. Ting! Takan smacked the side of a sword. You mean this sound? Muyong shook his head. The evil spirit predator. It seemed like even Takan, one of the 3 sovereigns of Azura's path, also didn't know. It meant that the black shadow was that much more extraordinary. Muyong rubbed his chin and pondered before he thought of a possibility. The sound of a sword. The sword master skill had similar words. As he remembered the skill, information regarding it appeared. Skill title, Sword Master, E. Description, the one who walks the path of a sword. A unique power only given to the King Slayer who has surpassed everything, honing his sword skills. Asterisk understanding of sword drastically increased. Asterisk you can find out about a sword's hidden story. Asterisk it pulls out the pure performance of a sword. His understanding itself had rose but the hidden story. He had never once checked the story. Of course, he didn't know what the part, it pulls out the pure performance, meant either. Muyong raised anguish. He held it still, placed it near his ears, and even made a scratch. Finally, it seems like you're mad. Takan clicked his tongue as he looked at Muyong but Muyong didn't care. Rather, it was more important to figure out the sound of a sword the man talked about. 20 times. It was the number of times Muyong was killed by the man. It was the first time in his life that he had felt this hopeless. Up until now, if he was stopped, he somehow made a way but the problem he was currently facing was beyond that scope. In the position where he was the assassin, he had already died 20 times. He thought he could do it. However, a wall blocked him. What you do want from me? Motionlessly, Muyong looked down at Anguish. He thought he had a higher chance with Anguish than the wicked god's sword since he used it longer. In reality, Anguish was the weapon he grew fond of. However, there was no reply from Anguish. It was expected. I'm crazy. Muyong quietly laughed. Then, Takan spoke. From here, you need to walk. This ice wall has the power to drive out the specters. Muyong raised his head and looked at the frozen wall that shot up towards the sky. As he approached closer, the wings that were made of specters were getting weaker. The land of God King Horus. In the past, there was an elf called the God King Horus. He became the world tree itself and planted his roots in this barren ice land. However, there were only a few elves who knew of this place. It was his priority to find the gatekeeper who protected the world tree. Muyong and Takan made a detour to walk around the ice wall. Then, due to a sense of someone's presence, the two stopped without having to say who first acted. Someone's here. Bug. No, monsters. Like us, there are 3 of them. The trio who wore black clothes and tilted their black broad-brimmed hats forward. They also noticed Muyong and Takan. Hyung Nim, what should we do? I think it might be better for us to get rid of them before we move on. We need to find the world tree as fast as we can. Let's go. The 3 turned their backs. And they climbed the ice wall as they started to run up towards the sky. A way to run on water, it was the extended version of perfect water walking. After recognizing them, Muyong couldn't help but knit his brows. Swordbone Trio of the Lawless Clan. One of the 5 great clans, the Lawless Clan. Among them, there was a trio called the Swordbone because they were the ones who were crazy about swords. Swordbone. Especially the oldest brother Sword One, he was in the top 10 humans, one of the strongest people. They clearly spoke about the world tree. Muyong held Anguish tightly. However, the one who possessed the Horus's throne was a completely different person. What happened? Did the past change? He had no idea why the Swordbone trio was currently here. However, he was certain about one thing. That they were both after the same thing. Muyong's heart started to beat faster. Chapter 99, On a Different Level, 4. TL, Yoni. Editor, Lee Suras. If. Anytime, anywhere, Muyong always thought of the worst-case scenario before he acted. And if he was to bump into the Swordbone trio? Impossible. He couldn't win. Due to the fight with Dark Dragon Barca, Muyong lost most of his undead. Not just that. At that time, he had a chance to fight and work through it because he had over 20,000 dwarves, a huge castle wall, and 50 magical barriers. However, it was hard to get that assistance now. If it's the Swordbone trio, they were strong enough to easily hunt a dragon. Muyong's current fighting power was definitely not weak. You could even say he was strong enough to be included in the top 1% of humanity. However, among them, the oldest brother Sword One was one of the top 10 humans. Not a 0.01% but a 0.001% being. And they were famous for not letting go of an opponent they targeted. Sword 1, Sword 2, and Sword 3. And in the past, I assassinated Sword 3. They weren't brothers who shared the same blood. However, they were closer than blood. They were crazy about swords but their bond was tighter than anything else. When Muyong lived as an assassin of the Forest of Death, he had assassinated Sword 3. It was the request of Alexandro Quintard of the Sun Guild and it was to keep the Lawless clan in check. After the Great Calamity, with the head of the Lawless clan as the center, they united, managed their crisis well and continued a steep growth which made the Sun Guild feel endangered. Because of this Sword 1 and Sword 2 went violent. After a long 3 years of relentless persistence, they destroyed 5 chapters of the Forest of Death. In the end, the Sun Guild proclaimed an all-out war against the Lawless clan and in the turmoil of it the two also died but, if that didn't happen, the foundation of the Forest of Death could have faltered. The Swordbone trio is after the World Tree. He needed to find out why. However, no matter how much he thought about it, he had no idea why the Swordbone trio was here at this time. The land of God King Horus would have become known after a long while later. It was all thanks to humans facing elves and hearing about the legend. To know about the land of God King Horus, you need to meet a spirit and then an elf. To do this you need to do something before and after. To elves, the land of God King Horus was like a legend. Only a very few elves knew of its existence and lived in large cities where normal elves gathered. And to enter those cities, it was required to make contact with spirits. Friends of spirits weren't easily approachable even by elves. If they weren't elves, humans would never be able to enter their city. To enter, the only way was to crush them through a war. If the future had changed, it was probably due to my actions. Myung rubbed his chin. If there weren't any more people who returned from the future, all of it would have been the results of Myung's actions. However, Myung has not spent much time among humans. Myung also only influenced a small number of people. So, who would have found out about the land of God King Horus and told the lawless clan? By looking at how they were after the world tree, it seemed like they also knew about it. Taken, who stood by him, spoke. Myung, there are humans who are quite strong. As he looked at the frozen wall the sword bone trio climbed, Taken placed his sword back in. Myung erased distracting thoughts and replied seriously. There are lots. More than what you think. Is that true? I didn't expect you to say so. I thought humans were an easily frightened and weak species. To see that there are humans who stimulate my fighting spirit, it seems like it isn't completely true. As if Taken realized something, he nodded his head. It was so. Humans weren't weak. Just, all the strengths were scattered and were used to fight each other that they weren't used properly. If they were to unite, they wouldn't have fallen behind in vain. However, it was also impossible for them to unite as one. Myung calculated as so. Besides that, Myung, is a world tree really at a place like this? I don't know what God King Horus is, but if it's the world trees, I know a bit. Like the word implies, isn't it a tree that supports the world? The place where everything gets conceived first. It was incomparable to the Pum tree the fire tars enshrined. The world trees were trees that supported the world. That was why the world trees were not visible by normal eyes. It was a spiritual existence. Only the gatekeeper who protects the place knew how to see the world trees. To be honest, Myung also didn't know much about the world trees. It was because he had never seen it before. He had only heard that it existed. In the underworld, there were 6 world trees, and it was told that among them 3 were managed by the demon gods, 1 by the elves, and 1 by an ancient dragon. Of course, the one that was left was at this place, the land of God King Horus. Taken, we need to find the gatekeeper before they do. But, there was something that the current Myung was better at than the sword bone trio. Myung was a master at finding things. 1 move, or as much as 2 moves ahead of them. The sword bone trio was good at, but they weren't better than Myung. Myung took a deep breath and started to move. He didn't have time. All the gatekeepers were required to have a knack at protecting, but if a gatekeeper was supposed to protect something that wasn't visible like the world tree, he would require more private security. It would probably be hard to find by a normal method. How about you release a flying type undead? If I release specters, we could probably search every inch of this place. He certainly did have a point. But, it didn't seem like the gatekeeper of the world tree would be found by a simple search. Myung decided to start searching from the lower parts. He might feel endangered and hide in the deeper parts. If he ever decided to hide, it would be much harder to find him. There is no use in hiding. Myung interrupted Taken. Taken, I heard that the world trees were managed by elves. Is that right? You're half correct and half wrong. It was sort of common sense to believe that the world trees were owned by elves. However, Taken said he was only half correct. He asked because Taken said it was the place where the first conception takes place, but it was quite unexpected. Then, the world trees that support the world were originally managed by the elves and the ancient dragons. Since the world trees bore new species and eggs, they needed strong species to protect it. And since they could also stay at the sacred ground, it was good for both parties. The world trees make new species. You didn't know. It was the first time he had heard of this. Well, there wasn't much that humans knew about the world trees. Takan was one of the sovereigns of the Azura's path. He was a predator who managed a numerous number of specters. It wasn't strange for him to know something that no one else knew of. After looking at Muyong's expression, Takan scratched his cheek before he continued to talk. It might be misleading to say new species are created, since there is another theory that says that they recreate things that existed in different worlds. Only the High Elves or the ancient dragons would know the truth, but High Elves and ancient dragons. They were both very small in number and very powerful. Transcendental species that surpassed normal elves and dragons. They were monsters that lived for more than a few thousand years. For a gatekeeper here in this ice land, which species do you think he is? Takan was well informed compared to Muyong, at least regarding the world trees. Muyong humbly accepted the truth and asked. Takan shrugged his shoulders as he talked. Not an elf. Even if he was a high elf, he couldn't live in a place like this. Although their magical powers are absolutely pure, their bodies are too weak. On the other hand, ancient dragons could live here, but there is no good reason for them to stay here. It's because dragons are naturally born with hot energy. You think he might be a third species? You don't even need to go as far as a third species. If he settled in a place like this to protect the world tree, it is highly likely for him to be a half-dragon type. A mix with the blood of a high elf, or a devil. Takan seemed quite certain. Not a devil. Muyong was also certain that he wasn't a devil. This place was part of the demon god's territory, but it was in a more remote area than where devils lived. Indeed, at the edge of the world, a few 100,000 devils lived together. Then he must be a half-dragon type species. Half-dragon type. Muyong sat for a moment. More haste, less speed. If he acted rashly, there was a chance that he might get further from his goal. So, Muyong checked from the bottom. What should he do to find a half-dragon type species that has blood from an ancient dragon and a high elf? If the gatekeeper inherited both characteristics, his strength should be close to a transcendental species. If he decided to hide, there was a possibility that even Muyong wouldn't be able to find him. Muyong thought of the details of finding God King Orus's throne 1. In the past, the owner of the ring was a completely different person. The monster scholar Kimahine. A woman who studied monsters. She would be in the top 10 most eccentric people. However, how she earned the God King Orus's throne and information about it wasn't written in detail in her history. Just that, found the gatekeeper. Through a bet with him, I found God King Orus's throne, was written. Naturally, histories were like that, but it was necessary to think about what monster scholar Kimahine might have been doing when she found the gatekeeper. She had learned about this land and gained curiosity about how the monsters lived in such extreme land. This was the coldest land compared to any other place. In this land where an abominable snowman couldn't even live in, there were other monsters that lived in this place. As a scholar, she probably gained curiosity. As she started her research, she probably found the gatekeeper. How? Muyong looked at a long-haired bear from afar. It was a grizzly type, but it was much bigger and had a thick hide. As he carefully followed the path the bear went, he was able to find it eating a blue mushroom that was buried under the snow. Name: Blue mushroom. Description: mushrooms born from the snow spirits. Constant use of this mushroom will purify magical powers and allow you to gain strong resistance against cold. This is it. Blue mushroom. Just to be certain, he watched other animals and monsters, but they all ate the same blue mushrooms that were buried under the snow. Resistance to snow. However, Muyong paid more attention to the first part of the sentence. Purification of magical powers. Half-type species have chronic problems with magical powers. Half. It meant mixed. Since it became one with another species, there was no way it didn't have any side effects. Usually, from birth, there were lots of cases where their magical powers were tangled up. If it was severe, it might make them go crazy and lead them to self-destruction. And Takan said the gatekeeper of the world tree would most likely be a half-dragon type species. You could say that the characteristics of an elf and a dragon were completely the opposite. Compared to his strength, the side effects would have worsened. To purify it, he might have settled at a place like this. The monster scholar Kim Ah-hin also would have researched about the blue mushrooms and coincidentally found the place where the gatekeeper was located. There is a chance that Oris might also not be a pure elf. If he was a normal high elf, there would be no reason for him to plant the world tree at a place like this. The place where most of the blue mushrooms are located. That's where the gatekeeper is. Muyong's eyes sparkled. He found a clue. The blue mushrooms were mushrooms born by the snow spirits. Of course, there was a high chance that he would be located at a place with lots of snow spirits. And Muyong could feel the spirits. Since he possessed a completely different strength than the good-natured strength of the spirits, he could clearly know it better than others. Found it. A smile crossed Muyong's lips. After passed through a complicated cave, he was able to find a house made out of ice. Muyong was certain that this was the gatekeeper's house. Although the sky was completely visible, it seemed like there was something magically done to keep it from being visible from the outside. And since Muyong was barely able to notice any difference, it was an incredible skill. It's been a long time since a visitor has come here. As he opened the door and went in, a blue-skinned, long-eared man was in a chair and welcomed Muyong. At least there was no hostility. Relaxation. Muyong could feel a distinct relaxation that only strong individuals could have. It truly has been a while. There must be a reason why you looked for me, right? I came to make a bet with you. Then, the man widened his eyes. It seems like you heard it from a high elf. Who was it? There shouldn't be many high elves who know I'm here. Even more, there should be far fewer people who know about the bet. The source isn't important. That is true. Now, let's introduce ourselves. I'm Swell. He concealed the fact that he was a gatekeeper. Since it currently wasn't important, Muyong didn't think much of it and replied. Muyong. Good, Muyong. And beside you is your pet. Do you have a death wish or something? As Takan acted up and backlashed at the man, Muyong stopped him. Swell, I want a different fight. That's right, you mean a bet? If you lose, you become a frozen statue. Do you also know about this? Clap. Swell clapped his hands once. Then, in the snowfield outside, hundreds of frozen statues popped out from the snow. Muyong looked outside for a moment before he nodded his head. I am aware. But if I win, I heard you will give out a treasure. What kind of treasure do you want? God King Oris's throne. Oh ho, that? It seems like you truly are well aware of me. Then, there is a reasonable bet for it. He wasn't really suspicious about Muyong. For him, the bet was all that was important. Swell took out a fist-sized blue mushroom from Swell's pocket. Let's say the person who finds the biggest blue mushroom wins. The time limit will be by sunset. You move first. I will move after 6 hours. For a moment, Muyong blankly looked at Swell. He felt like he had a similar conversation before. Merlin. It was so. How similar was it to the conversation he had with Merlin at the Blue Temple? Even the fact that he likes bets and that prideful tone made out an absolutely spitting image of him. 1. Editor's note, throne equals ring. Chapter 100, on a different level, 5. TL, Yoni. Editor, Lee Suras. Even the fact that his outer appearance was of a normal elf and that he was a mixed blood of 2 species. However, Muyong didn't say anything. He has a lot of enemies. Basically, devils loathed Merlin. And from what he knew, dragons and elves didn't like Merlin. He wasn't exactly sure of the reason why, but there were assumptions that it might have something to do with the creation of the underworld. From the beginning, how many people in this world would know of the truth behind Merlin and Solomon? They were certain that everything started because of the Lemegeten. In any case, there was no need to rashly take what little is known. I need to end it as quickly as I can. The Swordbone trio would need some time to find this place. Muyeong was planning to get what he wanted and flee during that time. One of the three things he needed to earn the Diablos' God King Horus's throne. If he did, then he would have 2 rings in total, including the lunatic sovereign's ring. It would be nice if he could achieve his goal and leave. It would be too risky to bump into them. No matter how strong the half-dragon type species in front of him was, Muyeong was able to figure out that he was still no match for Sword One of the 10 strongest people. He was about half a step to a full step behind. Although his strength is immensely powerful, there is a limit to impure strength. No matter if he had the blood from both a high elf and an ancient dragon, it was too irrational to want the two to be synthesized. If he was to use impure strength endlessly, it would only lead him to harm. It was also the reason why Swell couldn't leave this play for all that long. He probably knew that if he didn't have the blue mushrooms that were grown only at this place, his magical powers would be a mess and he, himself, wouldn't be able to control it. It would be too much just with Sword One, but if other brothers were to get involved, the results were obvious. It was better to just get what each of them was after and go on their separate ways. What's wrong? Ahihi. Are you not confident? If you are a Dakibi who is faint-hearted, I don't blame you. As Muyeong kept silent, Swell mocked him. Swell misunderstood and thought that Muyeong was frightened and kept quiet. There was also the basic disregard for Dakibis. Muyeong shrugged his shoulders and spoke. The details about the bet is limited to finding a new one, right? Swell looked directly into Muyeong's eyes. Do you think I'm a niggard who would use something that I already found? If you truly don't believe in me, I will swear on my name. Spite my appearance, elf and dragon blood flows through me. I don't lie. So an elf and a dragon. Dragons were a species that typically enjoyed lying. To be exact, they liked skillful wordplay, but it seemed like Swell didn't know very well about dragons. However, Muyeong didn't have a broad consideration to point out such things. Even so, isn't it too advantageous for you? You know this land better than anyone else. You would just need to bring back a blue mushroom that you had your eye on. Don't worry. The blue mushrooms last only for 2 days, they wilt afterwards. Since they are mushrooms that are born by the energy of spirit birth, once it ends their life also comes to an end. It's impossible to have something that I have already looked at. As if it was quite fair like this, Swell made a proudful expression. Muyeong grinned and then turned his body. I will be back soon. Muyeong felt as confident as if there was no way for him to lose. However, even when he was at the Blue Temple, Merlin paid dearly for disregarding Muyeong. He didn't think Swell wasn't greatly different from Merlin. The north side of the Land of Ice was vast. And Swell knew this place better than anyone else. At a glance, Swell might be absolutely advantageous, but there was a time restriction. Until the sunset, there was about 8 more hours left. Since he restricted himself to move after 6 hours, there could only be a smaller area he could be active. With only about 2 hours, it was impossible to search the entire area of the north side land. On the other hand, Muyeong was alone, but not really alone. Taken, release all your evil spirits. Oh ho! Are you thinking of winning by the number? I will release my specters. If we dig up the middle point of the underground and collect blue mushrooms a certain size or bigger, we could probably win this with ease. It seems like a nice move. For him to think of me, a sovereign, as a pet, we need to teach him a lesson. Taken ground his teeth. It seemed like Taken still had a grudge on Swell for calling him a pet. At the same time, few thousands of specters spread across the north side of the land. Muyeong also released specters and made them start their search with Murtyudun as the head. It was a gamble. Although it was a small possibility, there was a chance that the sword-bone trio might notice their actions. However, if that wasn't the case, he would be able to achieve results that exceeded Swell's expectations. I need to take measure for that scenario. However, he couldn't just ignore that low possibility. To limit all possibilities, it was necessary for Myung to act and change the current situation. Lure. Instead, he needed to beat them to it. For the sword-bone trio to circle around the furthest path. He thought of a way to use specters to restrict their movements. Wasn't it always better to limit all dangers? This was a desperate countermeasure to protect Swell until Myung earned the God King Orus's throne. Since the current Swell cannot beat the sword-bone trio. Conceit of his own ability. It probably was formed because he lived here for so long. At this place, there weren't a lot of monsters that could stand against Swell. No, there were just very few monsters. And when you reign as the king of a land, you can become arrogant. However, this place was totally boring. He probably needed some sort of vitality like a bet. Nevertheless, he probably never thought he could lose. That sort of arrogance approached Myung as a favorable factor. If the sword-bone trio weren't to suddenly appear and interfere, it would go as he planned. Should Wahi also help? If it is that mushroom, Wahi could probably find it easily. Wahi appeared from afar as she flapped her wings. Fairies normally hated dragons, so even if he was only a half-dragon, she could feel Swell's dragon energy and stayed far away. She waited for Myung outside and approached him when he appeared. All right. Myung spoke without much expectation. He truly didn't have any expectations for her. Wahi. No need to worry, just trust in Wahi, husband. With Myung's middle and index finger, he stopped Wahi's pouted lips. And looked around the front. I might be able to earn the God King Orus's throne more easily than I thought. There was a great price for being off one's guard. Soon, a numerous number of specters started to fly out from his back. As Myung returned, Swell let out a sneer. Why did you return empty-handed? It is because it is an embarrassing result to even show me. I will show you when you return. In Swell's eyes, it seemed like the Dakibi was trying to protect his last shred of pride. The blue mushrooms could only be easily found by pure souls like the spirits. Only the energy of death could be felt from the Dakibi. It would be difficult to find the blue mushroom by his own efforts, and even if he did, it would be a humble size. It would also be quite fun to see that face distorted. As if he was going for a walk, Swell left the cave. After not even 10 minutes, he returned. With a blue mushroom the size of his body. He was trying to deeply humiliate him, and sure enough, the Dakibi's expression instantly changed. However, that expression was filled with ridicule than shame. For him to ridicule. Is it only that big? Only. Did the Dakibi turn mad? This big of a size would be at least be one of the top sizes. There was no way for a Dakibi who strongly smelt like death to find something bigger than this. However, the Dakibi drew a talisman, and as he used it, a blue mushroom that seemed to be at least 2 m appeared. It was real. The blue mushroom was real. Even Swell rarely had seen a size that big. Naturally, his eyes widened and his body shivered. This, where did you find it? I won. As you promised, give me the God King Orus's throne. No. Not yet. If you want to earn the God King Orus's throne, you must win against me 3 times. Swell was desperate. He even expressed a strange heat. He is crazy over bets. Myung let out a big sigh. On the contrary, the defeat seemed to have provoked him. That desire, he couldn't force a stop. However, he couldn't just accept it either. Let's add to it, another demand. Fine. If you win 3 times from me, there is no reason for me to reject another demand. It was good that he accepted an assertive demand. It was because he wanted to continue the bet that much. Myung didn't mind it and spoke. I want to see Orus's enlightenment. That. Swell was surprised. It was surprising to know that a Dakibi also knew of it, but he had no idea what another species would use it for by looking at it. Horus was a transcendental species who placed a world tree himself. In the Twilight Era, where the elves gained supremacy. At the time, Horus was active as an emperor who led the elves. It was known that he, one who had a fighting power close to a god's rank, narrated all kinds of enlightenment in one book before his death. And among them, there was also enlightenment about swordsmanship. Horus had used different types of equipment, but he was known to be most exceptional in his swordsmanship. There is a possibility that Swell might have the book that has his enlightenments written. I am lacking in sword depth. Myung felt it. The black shadow. The existence in his dream was strong and the depth itself was different. As Myung continued to fight him, he keenly felt his own deficiency. He also was well aware which part he was lacking in. He had learned numerous times on how to handle weapons, but through them, he never was enlightened or performed more in depth. I just need to fill up what I'm lacking. So he was planning to get the feel of it by looking at Horus's enlightenment. However, it was a question if Swell was going to show him that important book through a mere bet. Swell pondered for a moment before he nodded his head. Normally, high elves are able to read the enlightenment, but fortunately the decision is on me. If you truly win, I will show you Horus's enlightenment. Myung clenched his fist. If he could only see that enlightenment, a few bets were nothing. Although he didn't have much time, it was worth the investment. Then, decide the next bet. After eating a handful of blue mushrooms, Swell took in a deep breath. Afterwards, he spoke as his eyes twinkled. Hide. And I'll find you. It was a good thing he had lured the Swordbone trio to a far location ahead of time. Myung became a pure northerly wind and melted into the land. In the end, Swell was unable to find Myung. The next bet was a treasure hunt. Each had to hide an item and needed to find each other's. By this time, even if he didn't want to connect it, it couldn't be helped but to be connected. There was certainly a connection with Merlin. If it wasn't true, there was no way that the repertoire would be this similar. And even on a similar bet, Merlin himself wasn't able to win against Myung. Swell was no different, and with a miserable face, he declared a surrender. I lost. You aren't a normal Dakibi. Taken, who was standing in front of Myung, reacted. It seems like the stupid half-dragon has finally opened his eyes. Myung is the one who reigns over all Dakibis. If you thought he was a normal Dakibi, then you're just admitting you're blind. As if Taken waited for this moment, he poured out sarcastic remarks. Then, Swell's face seriously hardened. Was it because he was treated as a pet? He was a fellow with quite a grudge. Editor question: God King Horus's throne or just Horus's throne?